I don't know if you know this about me, but I really like kaiju. Big giant monsters that cause all kinds of havoc throughout films, television, animation, and comic books. And I especially like this guy. Throughout the first half of 2023, I've added a number of kaiju toys to my collection. So let's take a look at them now in a video I call the Kaiju Summer Spectacular. First up is this guy, and this is the original 1954 Godzilla, or as he was renamed in America, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. This, like most of the figures you'll see in this video, was made by Bandai and was released in Japan, and I imported it through the company Hobby Link Japan. So this is what Godzilla looked like in his first appearance in 1954, and he of course has changed appearance over the years because back in the days of the original films, Godzilla was portrayed by an actor in a latex suit, and throughout the course of the filming, the suit would become worn or damaged, so they'd have to repair or modify or create an actual new suit for every new film. And every time they did that, Godzilla would change appearance slightly. Articulation on this figure is very simple. Just the shoulders and the hips, and that's it. And he stands about 6 inches tall, and most of the figures I'm going to look at today will be in the same scale, done in the same style. In that first 1954 film, the gentleman inside the Godzilla suit was Haru Nakajima. Mr. Nakajima would go on to play Godzilla in 12 consecutive films. Over the course of the first 50 years of the Godzilla franchise in Japan, Godzilla was portrayed by an actor in a suit, and only a handful of men have played Godzilla over the years. As in Japan, it is considered an honor and a responsibility to portray the King of the Monsters. Next on our list is this guy, Varan, who first appeared in his own film in 1958, which was released in the US as Varan the Unbelievable. And much like the first Godzilla film, when the Varan film came over to the US, it was heavily edited, and scenes of American actors were inserted into the story. Varan has never been as popular as some of the other monsters. In fact, most of you have probably never heard of him. Outside of his first film, the only other film appearance he's had was in Destroy All Monsters in 1968. And in that film, he only appeared as a puppet, because after 10 years, the original suit had degraded to such an extent that they couldn't use it in the film. The puppet in Destroy All Monsters was seen flying, because believe it or not, Varan is a flying monster. In the film, he has membranes under his arms, which can extend, and he can sort of glide on the air like a flying squirrel or a sugar glider. Now, how a monster that weighs several thousand tons can glide on the air currents, we call that kaiju science. Don't question it. Another interesting thing to note are the hind legs. Whenever the suit actors were asked to play a quadrupedal monster, they obviously could not walk like a quadruped because they have human legs. So often you'll see these type of monsters moving around on their hands and knees like a human would, because there's an actual human in the suit doing that same thing. This figure also only has 4 points of articulation in the shoulders and then in the hips, but that kind of looks silly, like he just broke his leg. So I don't know anyone that's gonna use that articulation to display him. Different writers have attempted to bring Varan back in modern films, but he always gets bumped and replaced with other, more popular monsters. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Next, we have A Tale of Two Baragons. Baragon 1965 by Bandai, and Baragon 1968, who was made by Playmates. And that is the only Playmates toy that you'll see in this video. All the rest of these were made by Bandai. So why two Baragons? Well, Baragon first appeared in 1965 in the movie Frankenstein vs. Baragon, otherwise known as Frankenstein Conquers the World. He is a subterranean monster that can burrow underground. His horn can glow like bioluminescent fish in the deep sea, and he can also breathe fire. So why did he look so different in 1968 when he appeared in Destroy All Monsters? During the 1960s, E.J. Tsuburaya, who was the special effects director for Toho Studios and worked on all of their Godzilla, Kaiju, and science fiction films, established his own production company, Tsuburaya Productions. Tsuburaya Productions created the long-running television franchise Ultraman. During that time, Tsuburaya was allowed to borrow different monster suits from Toho, give them new heads, new features, new paint jobs, and use them as Ultra Monsters. I'm not sure if there was some kind of official financial agreement between Toho and Tsuburaya that would allow this, or if it was just a handshake deal out of respect for Mr. Tsuburaya. At any rate, the 1965 Baragon suit was loaned out to Tsuburaya Productions for the Ultra series, and he was reused to make not one, not two, but 4 different Ultra monsters: Neronga, Mogura, Gabara, and Pagos. Toho requested the suit back for Destroy All Monsters, but after being reused and repainted all those times, it was a little bit worse for wear. So they patched the suit together as best they could, gave it a new head, and repainted it. But unfortunately, it was in no shape to be involved in any of the major fight scenes. So Baragon was reduced to just a couple of cameos at the start and at the end of the film. In Destroy All Monsters, there's a scene of the monster Gorosaurus attacking Paris by burrowing up from the ground underneath and destroying the Arc de Triomphe. Many thought that was strange, since Gorosaurus is not a burrowing monster. That scene was originally intended for Baragon, but as I said, the suit was in no shape to perform that scene, so Gorosaurus was substituted for Baragon. In the English dub of Destroy All Monsters, you can hear a newscaster say that Baragon has attacked Paris and not Gorosaurus. So it seems like the last-minute change in monsters did not make it to the script. Baragon is often referred to as the puppy dog monster because of his facial features and those big floppy ears. Kind of make him look like a puppy. And like the other figures we've just seen, he has shoulder and hip articulation, and this time his tail also has a twist in it. And you can see the difference in the faces between the 65 and the 68. The 68 has his ears pinned back, the horn is a little more curved, and the eyes are a bit squintier to give him a more sinister look. Baragon does not come around too often in these toy lines, so it's a bit of a treat to get 2 in 1 year. Ibara from 1966's Ibara, Horror of the Deep, released in the US as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Ibara being the aforementioned sea monster. As you can see, he's just a big red lobster. No relation to the restaurant. His big front claws can move around. And that's about it. In that film, Ibara was controlled by a terrorist organization called the Red Bamboo, and he was used as sort of a guard dog to keep the curious away from the uncharted islands that they were performing their nefarious activities on. Ibara made one appearance in modern Godzilla films, in Godzilla Final Wars in 2004. Ibara does have a nice black paint wash all over him, and the tips of his eye stalks are colored, but not much to him beyond that. Interesting to note, that original film, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, was originally written as a King Kong movie, but something happened along the way and King Kong was replaced with Godzilla. Now we get into the 90s, during the second era of Godzilla films, and here we have King Ghidorah from 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This is the kaiju that most fans consider Godzilla's arch-enemy. He is the Joker to Godzilla's Batman. This 1991 appearance is a bit different than his original 1960s version. The heads on the original version looked more like a traditional Chinese dragon, and that was updated in the 90s to give him a more kaiju-like reptilian look. And this guy is very, very shiny gold. You can see he's got 2 tails to go along with his 3 heads. And that wingspan takes up a lot of real estate on the display shelf. During the course of that film in 1991, Godzilla defeated King Ghidorah and actually destroyed one of his heads. But through the use of time travel and future technology, later in the film, King Ghidorah came back as Mecha King Ghidorah. So as you can see, the dead Ghidorah was rebuilt. His middle head that was missing was replaced by a robot head. He's got some cybernetic parts all over his body. His wings were replaced by cybernetics. He's even got some little cyber tips on his twin tail. The gold on this Mecha King Ghidorah is a little darker and not as shiny as the one we just looked at. And with both the Ghidorahs, the articulation is very limited. He just can move his legs, and the wings can twist around a bit. And that's about it. These kaiju figures are made more for display rather than play because the articulation is so limited, but if you were to play with them, they are pretty durable. At the end of that 1991 movie, Mecha King Ghidorah went down in the ocean, but his remains were recovered by the Japanese Defense Force, and they reverse engineered the future technology. So in 1993, we get Mechagodzilla. The original 1970s Mechagodzilla was a robot from outer space, controlled by aliens that wanted to take over the Earth. But the 1993 Mechagodzilla is on the side of the good guys. And this is a piloted mech. There is a crew inside from the Japanese Defense Force that will fight Godzilla. And he is a very shiny silver all around. Articulation is limited to just the shoulders and the head. The last Godzilla film of the 1990s era was Godzilla vs. Destroyer. And here is the antagonist from that movie, Destroyer. This kaiju evolved from a weapon that was used to destroy the original Godzilla in 1954, the Oxygen Destroyer. And this giant kaiju evolved from a smaller group of crustacean-like creatures which combined and evolved into this guy. You can see he's got those giant dragon-like wings, and articulation on this figure is limited to the hips and the wings. These arms do not move. You can see the face sculpt, those mandibles and teeth. Destroyer has a very demon-like appearance. One of the more unusual designs of a Godzilla enemy, kind of a cross between a dragon and a crustacean. We now enter the 2000s with Megaguirus from the film Godzilla vs. Megaguirus from 2000. Megaguirus is an enormous dragonfly-type kaiju. In the film, scientists developed something called the Dimension Tide to try to move Godzilla off our Earth into another dimension. But testing it, they inadvertently brought a dragonfly-like creature to our Earth, and they multiplied, and a swarm of them stole some of Godzilla's energy and transferred it to their queen. And this is their queen. She is powered by some of Godzilla's energy. Then she went to attack him and steal the rest of it. So she's got a pretty cool design. The giant red eyes with the rows of teeth. Some nice shiny coloring on her wings. The only articulation she has are the front claws that can move around, and that's about it. But she is a pretty unusual and nice looking kaiju design. Our last two Godzilla series kaiju for this video come from Godzilla Final Wars, released in 2004 as the 50th anniversary Godzilla film. This is Manda, the sea serpent. Manda first appeared in the 1960s in the film Atragon, which was part of the Godzilla Extended Universe. Manda then came back in Destroy All Monsters, and then he made his last appearance in Godzilla Final Wars, where he was unfortunately destroyed very early on in the film. And as you can see, Manda has the appearance of a Chinese dragon. He is an underwater kaiju. He's a sea serpent. He's got some nice coloring on his underbelly. The only articulation he has is right there in the neck, which isn't very useful, but it's there. Manda's one of those kaiju that rarely gets figures made. I'd like to have a figure of the original 1960s version, but for now this 2004 version will suffice. And here we have Godzilla from that same film, Godzilla Final Wars. This is one of my favorite Godzilla suits. It's got a very cat-like face with some very sinister looking eyes. Godzilla's not really a friend in Final Wars, but he's not an enemy either. He just kind of is. The people of Earth use Godzilla to fight off the other monsters which are being controlled by aliens, but at the same time they really can't control him. He's more of an alpha predator defending his territory more than anything else. So with this figure we have some articulation in the neck. His arms can move, which I guess would be considered a bicep swivel. They can go in and out. And he's got some hip articulation. And here's a comparison between the 1954 and the 2004. I think it's a nice evolution, with the 2004 version being a little sleeker and more agile than the original. And here we have the rest of my kaiju purchases for this year, and they are all monsters from the Ultraman series. I used to play with Ultra monsters quite often when I was a kid, as many of the monsters were imported to the US in various forms, but they were not related to the Ultraman series when they were sold here. So I really didn't know anything about their origins until I was an adult. So let's go through these guys. Our first Ultra monster is Antlar from Ultraman Episode 7, the insect-like creature. And all the Ultra monsters we're going to look at were from 1960s versions of Ultraman, a franchise that is still going on to this day, although it's only had sporadic success in the US. Next we have Ibara from Ultraman Episode 19. I really like this guy. He's got those wide-looking eyes, the giant mouth, horn on his head, and that thick reptilian skin. He's cool looking. Next we have Teleston from Ultraman Episode 22. Again, a cool looking guy. Another bipedal design with that frill. Kind of makes him look like the Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus. Here we have the ape-like Gigas from Ultraman Episode 25. It's got some unusual coloring with that white on the top portion of his body with the rest of it being brown. Makes him look like kind of he's part Yeti and part Bigfoot. Although his texture does seem more like scales rather than fur. Gomez from Ultra Q Episode 1. And Gomez is notable because he was created by modifying one of the Godzilla suits. As I explained earlier, Tsuburaya would often be allowed to borrow some kaiju suits from Toho, and this was one of those instances. And if you look closely, you can see some of the Godzilla features in the face. This is Pagos from Ultra Q, episode 18. And this is one of the kaiju that was created by modifying the Baragon suit, as I discussed earlier. If you look at the body, the ridges, and the tail, you can see that it's the same design as Baragon. They created a new head for it, and they decided Pagos would be a quadruped, so the suit actor had to crawl around on hands and knees. Wyndham from Ultra 7 Episode 1. This guy reminds me of Mechagodzilla, being all mechanical and silver, and he's got that cool looking bird-like head with the big crest on it. Makes him look like a big robot rooster. And finally we have Ghidorah from Ultra 7 Episode 32. Ghidorah was actually a good monster that fought with the Ultra team. Kind of like him, he's got that hunchbacked appearance. He's got a face similar to a Triceratops, but only with one horn. And that's all I have for this one. Do any of you watch kaiju films, Godzilla, Gamera, or otherwise? Do any of you watch the Ultraman series? And if so, do any of you collect any of the monsters from those films and TV shows? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know what your favorite monster was from this Kaiju Summer Spectacular. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.